The year is approximately 2500 BCE. You are standing on Salisbury Plain. The plain around you is not the open grassland it is now, managed and mown, with a visitor centre at one edge and a road at the other. It is more heavily wooded in places, intersected by rivers and streams you can hear but not yet see, populated by red deer and wild cattle and the small ponies that have been native to these islands since before anyone kept records of such things. The sky above the plain is the same sky, wide, frequently overcast in the way that English skies are frequently overcast. You are one of several hundred people who have been gathering here over the past weeks. Not all at once. The logistics of feeding several hundred people in one place for an extended period requires a degree of agricultural surplus that is real but not unlimited, and the work has been organised in phases, in crews, in the rotating labour system that the society around you has developed for exactly this purpose. What this project is for is not something you could explain in a sentence that would translate cleanly into modern language. The structures being built here are not simply monuments in the commemorative sense. They are not simply religious sites in the devotional sense. They are alignments, physical relationships between stone and sky, and sun and moon that encode, in the most permanent material available, a specific understanding of how the cosmos is organized and what the human community's relationship to it is. The winter solstice sun sets in perfect alignment with the main axis of the structure. The summer sun rises in the same alignment. These are not coincidences, they are the point. But we're getting ahead of ourselves because before anything can be aligned with anything, the stones have to be here, and the stones are not here yet. Stonehenge was not built all at once. This is the first and most important thing to understand about the site, because the version in your head, the circle of large standing stones with their lintels, complete, finished, the way it looks in photographs, represents only the final phase of a construction project that spanned roughly 1500 years and involved multiple distinct building campaigns by multiple generations of people who may not have had any direct connection to the people who started it. The earliest activity at the site dates to approximately 3000 BCE, a circular earthwork, a ditch and bank, roughly 100 meters in diameter, with a series of pits around its inner edge called the Aubrey Holes, named for the 17th century antiquarian John Aubrey, who first documented them. The Aubrey Holes contain cremated human remains, suggesting that the site was used as a burial ground from its earliest phases. No large stones yet, just earth and memory and fire. The large stones arrive in stages. The blue stones, smaller, darker, weighing between 2 and 5 tons each, appear in the archaeological record at approximately 2500 BCE. There are approximately 80 of them, and they come from the Prehistoric Hills in Wales, 250 miles from Salisbury Plain. The sarsen stones, the massive grey sandstone uprights and lintels that form the famous outer ring and the central trilithons, arrive somewhat later, probably beginning around 2400 BCE and continuing through subsequent centuries. They come from Marlborough Downs, about 25 miles to the north. They weigh between 15 and 50 tons for the uprights, and the lintels, smaller but still substantial, weigh several tons each. 250 miles, 25 miles, stones weighing up to 50 tons. No wheels, no iron, no horses for pulling. Horses existed in Britain by this period, but were not yet domesticated in the way that would make them useful for heavy haulage. What there was: wood, rope made from plant fibres, organised human labour, and, this is the part that the evidence increasingly supports, water. Let's start with the bluestones, because they present the more dramatic transportation challenge, and because their origin is one of the most thoroughly studied problems in Stonehenge archaeology. The Prehistoric Hills in Pembrokeshire, Wales, are where the bluestones come from. Specifically, they come from a site called Carn Godog and another called Rosyphalin, where outcrops of the specific rock types found at Stonehenge, spotted dolerite, rhyolite, and a few others have been identified, excavated, and analysed. The match between the Stonehenge bluestones and the Welsh outcrops is not circumstantial. Geochemical analysis of the stone composition, the specific ratios of trace elements, the mineral signatures that are as distinctive as fingerprints, places the bluestones at these specific locations with a degree of certainty that the archaeological literature now treats as established. 250 miles of the 5th millennium BCE British landscape stand between those outcrops and Salisbury Plain. The question of how the stones were moved has generated more competing hypotheses than almost any other question in British archaeology, and it has also generated the most experimental archaeology. The attempts to actually move large stones using only the materials and methods available to Neolithic people, and to document what works and what doesn't. The broad consensus, built from the experimental work and from the geographical analysis of the probable route, involves three elements: human muscle, wooden sledges, and water. The first problem is getting the stone off the outcrop. The blue stones at Rosythalin and Carn Godog were not randomly shaped lumps of rock that required extensive dressing before use. The specific rock formations at these sites naturally produce elongated tabular pieces when they fracture along their geological joints, pieces that, with relatively limited additional shaping, are already close to the forms found at Stonehenge. The Neolithic quarry workers were not fighting the rock's natural geometry. They were working with it, exploiting the fracture lines to produce the shapes they needed. The quarrying tools were stone, harder stone used to work softer stone, specifically antler picks and stone mauls, which are large rounded cobbles used as hammers. The technology is simple. The skill required to apply it effectively is not. Reading the fracture lines of a rock formation, knowing where to strike and with what force to initiate a controlled break rather than a catastrophic one, is expertise that accumulates over years of practice and is transmitted through teaching. The stone, once separated from the outcrop, needs to go down the hill before it can go anywhere else. And the Preseli Hills are genuinely hills. The descent from Carn Godog to the valley below involves significant gradient. The experimental archaeology of moving large stones on wooden sledges over uneven terrain shows that downhill movement is actually more dangerous than uphill movement, because the stone's own weight becomes an accelerating force that the ropes and the people controlling them have to manage carefully. Too much speed, and the stone outruns its handlers. Too little control, and the stone runs sideways into the descent, and the whole system fails. The sledge, a platform of logs on which the stone rests, sometimes with additional logs used as rollers beneath it, reduces friction and distributes the stone's weight over a larger surface area. Experimental groups have moved stones of comparable weight over short distances this way, with crews of 50 to 100 people pulling on ropes, and the effort involved is sustainable, if exhausting. The water phase of the journey is where the route becomes most interesting, and where the evidence from geology and experimental archaeology converges most usefully. The most efficient route from the Preseli Hills to Salisbury Plain involves water for most of its length. Specifically, it involves the rivers and coastal waters of southwestern Britain, because moving a 2-ton stone on water is categorically easier than moving it over land. A floating stone, on a raft or between two canoes or on a wooden platform over inflated animal skins, requires a fraction of the effort of a stone being dragged across terrain. The probable coastal route takes the bluestones from the Welsh coast, around the headland of Pembrokeshire, across the Bristol Channel, up the Bristol Avon, and eventually overland to Salisbury Plain, with river transport supplementing land transport at every available point. This route is not proven. The stones themselves leave no trace of how they travelled. A stone that has been on a raft looks exactly like a stone that has never been on a raft. What the evidence provides is a combination of geographical logic. Water transport is so much more efficient than land transport that any route that offers water should be preferred, and the absence of any obvious alternative that doesn't require either supernatural assistance or logistical heroics that no experimental work has come close to demonstrating. The experimental groups that have attempted to move bluestone weight objects across the Bristol Channel have done so with varying degrees of success. The crossing itself is manageable in calm conditions. The loading and unloading of the stone, the transitions between water and land transport, are the moments of highest risk and highest difficulty, because these transitions require lifting the stone out of the water or onto the water, and lifting is where the weight of the stone is most directly confronted. Here we need to talk about leverage, because leverage is the answer to the question that everyone asks when they look at these stones and then look at the people who moved them. How did they do it with their hands and their backs? The answer is not their hands and their backs. The answer is levers. A lever, a long wooden pole with a fulcrum beneath it, multiplies force. This is a physical law, not a theory, and it was as true 5,000 years ago as it is now. A crew of people pushing down on the long end of a lever, with the fulcrum positioned close to the stone, can lift an enormous weight with what feels like moderate effort. The weight lifted is inversely proportional to the distance ratio between the short end and the long end. A lever with a short end of 1 foot and a long end of 10 feet multiplies the applied force by a factor of 10. Neolithic people had wood. They had long poles. They understood, through direct practical experience of moving heavy things, the principle of the lever without needing to articulate it as a physical law. The experimental archaeology of Neolithic construction consistently shows that levering, combined with packing with wooden wedges to hold incremental gains, with the patient, iterative approach of inching a heavy thing upward, one small movement at a time, is capable of achieving what looks, from outside the process, like the impossible. The sarsen stones are a different order of challenge from the blue stones, not because of the distance, 25 miles instead of 250, but because of the weight. The sarsen uprights of the outer circle weigh an average of 25 tons. The largest upright, stone 56 of the inner horseshoe, weighs approximately 50 tons. The capstone of the tallest trilithon has been estimated at around 50 tons as well. 50 tons, on a wooden sledge, across 25 miles of chalk downland. The Marlborough Downs, where the sarsen boulders occur naturally as surface deposits, are not dramatically hilly. The route from the Downs to Stonehenge involves gradual slopes rather than steep ones, which matters enormously for the mechanics of stone transport. A gradual slope is a place where a sledge can be moved by a large crew of people pulling on ropes in a sustained, steady effort. A steep slope is a place where the same weight becomes dangerous. The experimental work on sarsen weight transport has been attempted several times, most notably by a team in the 1990s that attempted to move a replica sarsen stone using only Neolithic-era tools and methods. The results were instructive. The stone moved slowly with a crew of approximately 130 people, using wooden sledges on timber rails laid ahead of the sledge and moved around to the front as the sledge progressed. The technique worked. It was slow, covering perhaps a mile a day under good conditions. But over 25 miles, a mile a day means 25 days of sustained effort, which is entirely within the range of what a well-organized Neolithic labor force could accomplish. The timber rail technique, laying a trackway of logs ahead of the moving sledge and recycling them from behind to the front in a continuous loop, is one of the most practically supported hypotheses for the sarsen transport. It reduces friction dramatically compared to bare earth, it creates a predictable surface that the sledge can navigate consistently, and it requires materials that were abundantly available. The nearby river valleys would have provided timber in substantial quantities, and the organization required to fell, shape, and lay the timber trackway is challenging, but within the demonstrated capacity of Neolithic societies. A recent alternative hypothesis, proposed by a team of researchers in 2020, suggests that sarsen transport may have used a mechanism involving a wooden frame, a rectangular platform on wooden balls acting as ball bearings. The experimental demonstration of this technique moved a scaled-down test stone more efficiently than the sledge and roller method. Whether the ball-bearing hypothesis reflects actual Neolithic practice or is simply a valid alternative that they did not happen to use is not determinable from the archaeological evidence currently available. Both work. The stones are at Stonehenge. Something worked. The most carefully studied and most challenging aspect of Stonehenge's construction is the erection of the stones, the process by which a horizontal sarsen stone lying on the ground becomes a vertical sarsen stone standing in a prepared pit. The pits, the stone holes in which the uprights stand, have been excavated and documented in considerable detail. They share a consistent feature. One side is vertical and the other is a gradual ramp. This asymmetry is not accidental, it is engineering. The ramp side of the pit was where the stone was introduced. The stone, arriving horizontally on its sledge, was maneuvered to the edge of the pit with its base hanging over the ramp side. Then, using a combination of ropes pulling from the opposite side and levers working from below, the stone was tilted, slowly, incrementally, with the base sliding down the ramp as the top rose until it reached the vertical. At the vertical position, the stone's base was in the pit, and the stone was propped in place with timber supports while the pit was backfilled to lock it in position. The evidence for this technique comes from the stones themselves. The bases of the Stonehenge sarsens show specific wear patterns consistent with having been dragged down a ramp, and the pit profiles, where they have been fully excavated, consistently show the asymmetric form that the ramp technique predicts. The timber A-frame, a massive wooden structure built over the pit, over which ropes pulling the stone could run, is the most likely mechanism for the final stages of raising. An A-frame multiplies the pulling force of a crew of people on ropes, redirecting horizontal pull into vertical lift, and the archaeological evidence from other Neolithic and Bronze Age construction sites in Northern Europe shows timber structures of sufficient sophistication that an A-frame at Stonehenge would not be beyond the demonstrated construction capacity of the period. The lintels are a separate problem from the uprights, and arguably the more impressive engineering achievement. A lintel weighs several tons. It needs to be raised to a height of approximately 4 meters and positioned precisely on top of 2 uprights, where it is locked in place by a mortise and tenon joint. A carved knob on the top of each upright fits into a corresponding socket carved into the underside of the lintel. Mortise and tenon, in stone, 5,000 years ago. The joints were carved with the same stone tools used for everything else: flint, groundstone, bronze later in the sequence, and they are precise enough that the fit between the upright's tenon and the lintel's mortise was tight enough to contribute to the structure's stability. This is not rough carpentry transferred to stone. It is skilled stoneworking that understood the engineering purpose of the joint and executed it accordingly. The raising of the lintels is the point at which the lever and the crib become indispensable. The crib, a platform of timber logs built up under the lintel in alternating layers, each layer at 90 degrees to the previous one, allows the lintel to be raised incrementally, one small lift at a time, with the crib packed higher under it with each lift. The process is like raising a stone on a stack of logs, adding logs under it with each small gain in height, until the lintel is at the level of the uprights and can be slid horizontally into its final position over the mortises. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated this technique successfully. It is slow, it is labor-intensive. It requires the coordinated effort of many people working in a sequence that has been planned and practiced. But it works, and it produces exactly the result that the Stonehenge lintels represent: heavy stones, precisely positioned, at height. The question of who organized all of this, who planned it, who directed it, who maintained the social infrastructure over the centuries required to build Stonehenge in its final form, is a question that the archaeology can illuminate but not fully answer. What the archaeology tells us is that the people who built Stonehenge were not struggling subsistence farmers barely keeping themselves alive. They were a society with sufficient agricultural surplus to free significant numbers of people from food production for extended periods. They were a society with long-distance trade connections that brought them objects, specific flint tools, pottery styles, animal bones from across Britain and beyond. They were a society with a complex cosmological understanding that expressed itself in monuments aligned to astronomical events with a precision that required sustained observation and sophisticated spatial reasoning. Recent isotopic analysis of the human remains found at and near Stonehenge has revealed something unexpected. Some of the people buried there did not grow up in Britain. The strontium ratios in their teeth, which record the geology of the water sources in which the individual grew up, indicate origin points in continental Europe. Some of the people most closely associated with Stonehenge were not local. They had travelled or been brought from significant distances. This suggests that Stonehenge was, even in its earliest phases, a site of broader significance than a single community's monument. It was a place that people came to from across Britain and possibly from across the Channel to work, to bury their dead, to participate in the astronomical and ritual events that the site made possible. It was, in some functional sense, that we cannot fully reconstruct a destination. The effort required to build it is not inexplicable once you understand that the people building it had reasons to consider it the most important thing they could do with their time and their labor. Cathedrals were not built because the people of medieval Europe had nothing better to do. They were built because the people who built them believed that building them was the most important thing a community could invest in. Stonehenge was built for the same reason, expressed in a different language, by a society whose specific beliefs we cannot fully recover, but whose commitment to the project is written in the stones themselves. The structure that stands on Salisbury Plain today is not Stonehenge as it was when it was complete. Many of the original stones have fallen, been removed in antiquity for other building projects, been broken by frost and erosion over 5 millennia, been damaged by the visitors who chipped souvenirs from them before such things were prohibited. The complete Stonehenge, the structure at the end of the final building phase, approximately 1500 BCE, contained around 162 stones in their various configurations, of which approximately 63 remain standing, or are present in fallen form. What remains is still, 5,000 years after the last stone was set, one of the most precisely constructed stone circles in the world. The outer Sarsen circle, in its complete form, was a ring of 30 uprights with 30 lintels, forming a continuous horizontal band at the top, a feat of engineering that required not just moving and erecting the individual stones, but ensuring that the uprights were level with each other to within a few centimeters across a circle whose diameter is nearly 30 meters, so that the lintels sat horizontally rather than at angles. The outer circle uprights are not identical. They vary slightly in height, and the variation is not random. The uprights were shaped to compensate for variations in the ground level beneath them, ensuring that their tops were at the same height regardless of the ground on which they stood. This is precision work. This is someone understanding the problem. Uneven ground produces uneven tops. Uneven tops mean the lintels don't sit level, and engineering a solution. The center of the site, the inner horseshoe of 5 trilithons, pairs of uprights with a single massive lintel spanning each pair, is the most dramatic element of the final structure. The question is, why would they do this? Not could they, not how, why. The astronomical alignments give us part of the answer. Stonehenge is not primarily a monument that says, "Look at us." It is primarily a mechanism, a device for making the cosmos visible, for catching the moments of solstice and equinox in stone and marking them permanently, so that the community gathered here knows, every year, where in time they stand. The winter solstice sunset through the main axis of Stonehenge is not accidental. It is the point. It is the thing that 5,000 years of prior astronomical observation built toward. In a world without clocks, without calendars in the modern sense, without any written record of what had been observed and when, a stone that captures the exact moment of the year's turning is not a luxury or a decoration. It is a tool. It is the most permanent tool that the technology of the period could produce for the purpose it needed to serve. But it is also more than a tool. The human societies that built and rebuilt and elaborated Stonehenge over 15 centuries were investing in something that expressed their understanding of their place in the world. The enormous communal effort of its construction was itself meaningful. The bringing together of people from across Britain, the shared labour of moving stones that no single community could have moved alone, the physical embodiment of a social network that was larger than any individual settlement. You build Stonehenge because you believe it matters. You believe it matters because your whole understanding of what you are and where you are situates it as the most important thing your community can do. The labour is the meaning, as much as the structure. This is not so different from the cathedral, or the pyramid, or the interstate highway system, if you think about it in terms of what a society chooses to invest its collective energy in as an expression of what it values. Every civilization builds things that seem, to outside observers, extravagantly expensive for their apparent function. They're never just about the function. Stonehenge is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The site receives approximately 1.5 million visitors per year. The winter solstice sunrise and the summer solstice sunset still align with the monument's main axis, exactly as they did 5,000 years ago. The stones have not moved, the sun has not moved. The alignment was engineered to last. It has. If you watched this far, take a moment to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.